This video is about writing a personal narrative. We're going to talk about the components of a personal narrative. That means the parts that go into a personal narrative. First, let's talk about what a personal narrative is. If it's personal, it's about you. And if it's a narrative, that means it's a story. The story can be fiction or nonfiction, meaning it could be completely false, something fantastical, or it can be something true. Since it is a personal narrative, it should be written in the first person, the I form. So personal narrative, story about you or with you in it. So to begin your personal narrative, you got to think about what you want to write. So as you plan your narrative, you got to figure out what the story is. You're going to need a beginning, a middle, and a conclusion. Let's talk about each of these. The beginning needs to have a hook. That means it should have something interesting that happens to start with. Could be some form of action, something surprising, something sad, but something that's going to catch the reader's interest. In the middle, you need action or something happening. And then the conclusion is not simply writing the end at the bottom of the page, but it should wrap up the story. It should bring things together and conclude what's happening rather than just stop writing. Now your story then needs a setting. Setting is where the story takes place. All stories take place somewhere. You need to make sure that you give a good description of the setting. And of course, no story would be complete without some characters. For your characters, you're going to need to include a physical description, but don't forget you need to include some information about their personality. Most importantly, try to show rather than tell. That means have the character do something or say something that allows their personality to show through. Rather than saying they're the bad guy, show some activity in the story that explains, lets the reader see that they're the bad guy. Your characters should have dialogue. Dialogue is simply when the characters talk to one another. Your dialogue needs to be meaningful. In other words, it should have something to do with the story and not just in the story because it's part of the assignment, but it should help the story move forward. I've got a whole nother video that you can access about writing dialogue, but it does need to be meaningful to the story plot. And your personal narrative should have several paragraphs. The paragraphs should happen to show when a change of action happens, a change of setting happens, or when the dialogue changes from person to person. No personal narrative should be one long paragraph. It does need to be made up of several separate paragraphs. Okay, let's do a quick review of everything we talked about just now. Your personal narrative is a story about you, so it can be written in the first person, the I form. Should have a beginning with a hook, a middle with some action, and a conclusion that wraps up the story. The setting needs to mentally transport the reader to another land, another place. The reader needs to feel that they are in the setting of the story. Your characters need a good physical description, and you need to show or let their personality come through in their actions. Characters should have good dialogue. The dialogue needs to be meaningful to the script and help the story move along. And finally, your story needs to be written in multiple paragraphs. When the action changes, the setting changes, or the dialogue happens, change the paragraph, start a new one. Good luck, be creative.